Hey everyone, it's Laura Volpes for ModaScrap, and in today's video I'm going to share with you 3 different ways in which you can use the winter frame and winter season dies to create 3 different projects. We will see how to create a tag, a shaker card and a shadow box card that can double up as a little lantern and be used as home decor. And because these projects do not require any coloring, I think this would be great for crafters of any skill level. Let's start from the tag, and as a first step, let's have a look at the products that I used to create it. I used the winter frame die, the winter season die, and I also used the dashing circles dies, all available in the ModaScrap store. I only used 2 colors for my palette for this tag, and I used the ModaScrap WOODSTOCK white cardstock and the pastel grey cardstock. As I said, this tag was very quick and easy to create, and I started by doing some die cutting. I have here 2 circles, one out of some pastel grey cardstock and one out of some WOODSTOCK white cardstock that I die cut with the dashing circles dies. I'm then going to use the winter frame die to create a beautiful floral frame out of the WOODSTOCK white die cut circle. I secured the die in place with some purple tape and then I ran it through my die cutting machine, and look how gorgeous and delicate this frame is. It's absolutely beautiful. All 3 projects today will feature such a frame as well as some other elements in common, and we will see this as the video progresses. The next step was to create a snowfall effect on what will be the background of my tag, so I took some fluffy in the color old linen, but you could also use brilliant white if you wanted to. I just was going for a little bit of a more subtle result. What I did is I just picked up some of the fluffy with a spatula, I diluted it with water, and then with a paintbrush I created droplets all over my panel. And because fluffy have glitter in them, this will also add some subtle shimmer to the tag. I set the background with the fluffy aside to dry, and then I started working on my landscape here. I'm going to do some die cutting using dies from the winter season die set, and I'm going to create all the elements out of some WOODSTOCK white cardstock to create this beautiful tone-on-tone effect. I think this is a very clean and simple look, but it's really beautiful and effective for winter and Christmas cards. So I have my first layer there with the stag, and then for the second layer and the third one as well, I die cut some WOODSTOCK white cardstock with the trees that are also part of the same die set. As you can see, the dies cut just part of the hillside, which means you can customize the die cuts to fit whatever project you're creating, which makes this die set even more versatile. I glued the 3 layers to each other and behind the frame using some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, and then I trimmed off any excess using my precision scissors. You can see how adding more and more layers is going to create interest on the project. And these dies are so beautiful that it really doesn't take much to create absolutely stunning projects. You can see here I did a little bit of die cutting and I just layered some paper in 2 different colors and that's it, but I think that the result is absolutely gorgeous. At this point I adhered the tag front to the base and I turned it into an ornament by die cutting some more pastel grey cardstock using one of the dies in the winter frame die set. I die cut these twice out of pastel grey cardstock so that I would have the back of my tag that is nice and finished as well. And in order to complete that part, I also die cut one more circle out of pastel grey cardstock, and I'm stamping a sentiment from the Santa Claus stamp set. This was part of last year's Christmas release by ModaScrap, and I'm going to adhere it to the back of my tag so that this can be added to gift packaging, or you can even not stamp the sentiment and leave that empty for your personalized message. I finished off the tag by threading some baker's twine through the eyelets there at the top of my ornament, and that's the first project for today. As you saw, very quick and easy to make, but in my opinion absolutely stunning. The second project for today is a flat Vellum Shaker Card that I created using the same supplies as I showed at the beginning of the video, plus a couple extra. I introduced one more color in my palette by using the pastel purple cardstock by ModaScrap. To create the base of my card, I used the dashing squares dies, and then for my sentiment I used the Christmas Italian style stamp set. As a first step, I did some die cutting off camera and I used one of the squares dies in the dashing square stamp set to die cut some pastel gray as well as some pastel purple cardstock. I created a frame using the winter frame die and the dashing circles dies out of some woodstock white cardstock in the same way as I showed in the first part of the video. Using the same circle die that I used to create the frame, I also die cut the window of my shaker out of my pastel gray cardstock panel, and then I added a snowfall effect on the purple panel here, which will be the background for my shaker card. Also in this case, I diluted some fluffy in the color Old Linen with some water and I created the snowfall with a paintbrush. For my landscape elements, I did some more die cutting with the winter season dies of some woodstock white cardstock by ModaScrap. This time, instead of going for a woodland scene, I created a small village just to differentiate the projects a little bit more and to try out all the fun dies in that beautiful set. I die cut two hillsides here in order to create again a little bit of layering and add depth to the scene, and before gluing everything I'm going to move on and start working on the pocket of my shaker. As I mentioned, this is going to be a Vellum Shaker Card and it's going to be a flat one, and this is why I am creating this pocket. This is where my embellishments will go, and because this shaker card is flat, it's going to be much easier to mail than a traditional shaker card. So what I did is I trimmed down some vellum to a size which is a little bit larger than my card front. The square there measures 4 3/4 by 4 3/4 inches, and I cut my vellum to 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 inches. I scored each side at 1/4 of an inch, and then you can see here I am trimming off the corners so that it's going to be easier to fold these little flaps and create my pocket. I'm reinforcing the folds with a scoring tool, and then I can go ahead and adhere this to the back of my shaker. I'm going to use some double-sided adhesive on the flaps that I just created, and as you can see I am going to glue just 3 of them, whereas I'm going to leave the 4th one lifted, because this way I can use this, as I said, as a pocket and add all my embellishments. As you can see, the vellum also tones down that purple cardstock and creates this really soft wintry feel that I personally really love. I am now filling up my shaker with some chunky glitter, and the reason why I chose this type of embellishment is that I wanted my shaker card to stay as flat as possible, but I also wanted to be able to be generous with my shaker elements, and this was just the perfect solution for that. At this point I can close the pocket by sealing that 4th side over there, and then before moving on and finishing to assemble my shaker card, I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of snowfall also on the vellum here. You can in real life still see some of the snowfall that you have on the purple panel, but I wanted a little bit of a stronger effect, and that's why I added the snow also on the vellum. Next, I adhered the landscape elements together and I also glued them down to the frame. I'm using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, and once that step is done, I can trim off the excess that's hanging off the frame using my precision scissors, and then I can assemble my shaker at last. I started by adhering the gray panel on my shaker background, and then I'm going to nest the white frame right inside that window opening there. And by the way, if you wanted this project to be even faster, you could skip the shaker part, just back the frame with some vellum and glue everything to your purple cardstock, and the result would be absolutely gorgeous anyway. I decided that I wanted to mat my grey cardstock on some white cardstock as well, and so I die cut some woodstock white paper by ModaScrap with another of the dashing squares dies, and I glued everything together. For my sentiment, I'm going to use the Christmas Italian style stamp set, and I'm stamping the word Christmas on Woodstock white cardstock using a light grey ink. And then I'm also going to heat emboss the second part of the greeting so that the whole thing reads Christmas wishes. And I'm going to do some heat embossing with white embossing powder over that same pastel grey cardstock that I used for the front of the shaker. I trimmed the wishes part of the sentiment into a thin banner, and then I also cut out the word Christmas. There aren't coordinating dies to this stamp set, so you're going to have to cut it out using your favorite method, whatever that is. I adhered the sentiment to the front of the card, and I think it adds the perfect elegant touch to this project. I am absolutely in love pretty much with the entire release by ModaScrap. And then as a finishing touch, I added some Nuvo drops on the top right and lower left corners of the card. And here is the second project all done for today. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, so elegant and delicate, and as you can see, it doesn't take very long to make at all. Alright, it's time to move on to the third and final project for today, which is a shadow box card that can double up as a lantern and can be used as a wonderful home decor for winter and a beautiful handmade gift. The only extra supply that I used is the Wish stamp set, and to start off I created the base of my shadow box. I have some pastel grey cardstock here that is now cut at 5 1/4 by 12 inches. I'm not going to use the full length of the paper, and I'm going to write all the measurements on screen. I made the first score line at 5 1/4 inches, the second one at 7 5/8 inches, and then I made a third score line at 8 1/4 inches, and there is where I'm going to actually trim off my cardstock. So just to recap the measurements here, I have a sheet of pastel grey cardstock that is cut to 5 1/4 by 8 1/4 inches and is scored at 5 1/4 and 7 5/8 of an inch. I'm then going to repeat the same steps on a second sheet of pastel grey cardstock, and this way I created the front and the back of my shadow box card. I'm going to create an opening on my shadow box front here using the Dashing Circles dies. This is the same die that I've been using throughout the whole video, and it's the third largest die in the set. At this point I can go ahead and reinforce the score lines with my scoring tool, and I also decided to coat the back of this panel using some vellum by ModaScrap. Actually, if you decide to recreate this project, I would advise that you wait until later on to take this step, and I will explain to you why in a little bit. But anyway, that's how I did it, and I anyway found a way around the troubles that this got me into. I used some double-sided adhesive and I trimmed off the excess with my scissors. And I think that the vellum really creates that magical touch in this project, especially when used with tea lights. I will show you everything later on. The next step is to create more layers for the shadow box, and for that purpose I cut some more pastel grey cardstock, and the size of these panels is 5 1/4 by 6 inches. I am scoring the panels along the long sides at 3/8 of an inch from each end, and this basically leaves me with some flaps that I can use to adhere these panels inside my shadow box. Again, I'm using my score tool to reinforce the lines, and here comes the part where I wish I hadn't adhered the vellum to the front of my shadow box. The reason is that at this point, what we have to do is to cut some circles on the inner layers of the shadow box, and these circles need to be as aligned as possible with the one on the shadow box front. If I didn't have the vellum there, it would be so easy now to just nest the die in the opening of the shadow box front, secure it to my inner layer, and then run everything through my die cutting machine. This was not an option for me at the time, so I used this circular die cut as a guide. I used the shadow box front to help me position this as best as I could. I secured it in place with some purple tape, and then I could take my die and basically position it around the die cut. I'm going to secure the die with some purple tape and then remove the die cut circle from underneath, and I can run everything through my die cutting machine. And this is also basically the trick that I used to position the die also on that second layer that you can see at the top of the screen right now. Also keep in mind that because we have the vellum and because we have that winter frame die cut, it doesn't have to be perfect because things will be hidden a little bit, but you know, it's good to try and be precise. Here are the pieces that we have at the moment. On the left we have the front and the back of the shadow box, and on the right we have the inner layers. I then did some more die cutting off camera and created these 3 circular frames with the winter frame and dashing circles dies. I also cut some more vellum that I'm going to use to back those inner layers, and I created this nice snowfall effect here as well with fluffy in old linen. As you can see, there are several repeated elements throughout the 3 projects, which makes this also a great handmade gift set to give to somebody this winter season. This is a rudimentary mask that I created with scrap paper in order to create that snowfall effect also on the front of the shadow box. And then off camera I went ahead and I created several landscape elements that I glued to the back of these winter frames. On the front of the shadow box I'm going to have a hillside with trees as well as one of the stags in the set, and then on the inner layers I'm going to have just one element on each layer. They will not be very visible, they will kind of create a shadow effect as you look through the shadow box, so I didn't need a ton of layers there. Here is how I built those inner layers. I started by backing them with the vellum. In the meantime, my fluffy was completely dry. I built my frames here with the landscape elements, and one thing that I wanted to mention is that when gluing down the frame, I made sure that each frame was rotated with respect to the others, so that there is a little bit more movement in the final project. Once that is done, I can finish off that inner layer by nesting the winter frame inside the circular opening that I created, and then I can actually go ahead and assemble my shadow box card. Here I was trying to show you this kind of transparency effect with the vellum, which I think is really beautiful, especially on winter projects. What I'm doing here is I am coating the back of my shadow box card, this is the inner portion, with some pastel purple cardstock, because I wanted to kind of use the same color palette that I had on the shaker card that I made earlier in the video. It would have been better to do this after assembling part of the shadow box at least, because as you can see here, I had to lift the cardstock a little bit so that I could hide the flap behind the purple panel there, where the front and the back of the shadow box are joined. At this point I'm going to adhere the inner layers using some double-sided adhesive, and this is very easy to do. You first add them to one side of your shadow box, and then I'm going to show you how easy it is to close the shadow box together. Another thing that I wanted to point out at this point is that I am adhering the 2 layers quite distant from one another, and later on I actually was able to peel off the second one and move it closer to the front one so that both are very close to the front of the shadow box. I'm going to get to that later on, but now I wanted to show you how to close your shadow box card. You're going to add some double-sided adhesive to the remaining flaps. You're going to fold the free side on top of the inner layers, and then you're going to fold the front of the shadow box on top of that exposed double-sided adhesive on the flap on the remaining side of the shadow box. And here is the project once it's all assembled. As I was saying, I decided to remove one of the layers and to position it a little bit closer to the front, and this is because the vellum that I'm using is quite heavyweight, which is wonderful because it's really sturdy, but it means that it covers quite a bit of whatever you have behind. And the added advantage of having all the layers close to each other is not only that you see more of the back layers, but also that you have more space behind them to add your LED lights. I used some fairy lights and the result was absolutely magical. To finish off this project, I stamped the sentiment Wish from the Wish stamp set, again with grey ink, and then I heat embossed Make A so that the whole thing reads Make a Wish. The second part was heat embossed with white embossing powder on pastel grey cardstock. I adhered this wonderful tree branch here, it's absolutely gorgeous, from the winter season die set, and then, like I did for the shaker card, I finished off my shadow box with a few Nouveau drops in opposite corners of the front. And here is the third and last project for today. This one required a few extra steps compared to the first ones, but I don't think it features any difficult technique and the result is really stunning. And that's it for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope I inspired you to create with products from the latest ModaScrap release. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. And as always, thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.